Good afternoon, Patriots. This is the American Vision, broadcast on the TLBTV network and brought to you by the Liberty Beacon Project. I'm your host, Bill Muckler, and I'm coming to you from my home studio in Cocoa, Florida, on Florida's Space Coast. I almost forgot where I was. And today I have a guest, Major Scott Huesing, who's a retired major in the United States Marine Corps. And what I'd like to do is give you a little bit of story about the Marine Corps. And his book is Echo in Ramadi. The 4th Marine Regiment was known as the China Marines, was really founded back around 1914. And in 1916, we did something like I always tell all my friends when people say, well, aren't you part of the Navy, or do you like the Navy? Do you not like the Navy? And I always say, hey, the Marines love the Navy. They take us on all expense paid cruises to exotic places. They give us free food and drinks and medical care. What's not to love? So the 4th Marines, the first place they went was Acapulco, Mexico. And they got to the bay there. They never really invaded Mexico, but the United States was having a rough time with Mexico at the time. Then in 1916, the 4th Marines went to the Dominican Republic, another exotic place. So then in 1927, this is where the China Marines come in. The 4th Marine Regiment was stationed in China, in Shanghai, to protect the American interests there, international interests. And they were there until 1941, in which time the Japanese invaded China. And the 4th Marines left China, except for about 204 Marines and Navy personnel who stayed there and were ready to leave on December 10th. And that was 2 days after Pearl Harbor, and they were captured by the Japanese and subjected to slave labor imprisonment for the rest of the war, which ended up in August of 1945. So they were there for almost 4 years as prisoners. The rest of the 4th Marine Regiment went to Corregidor, and they were invaded by the Japanese on Corregidor, and they had about 4,000, but about half of them were non-combatant Army and Philippine Army. And so the 4th Marines were pretty much decimated at that time, and those that were captured were put into slave labor and Japanese concentration camps. I actually served in the 1st Marine Brigade in Hawaii, and one of the units there, it was the 4th Marine Regiment and Marine Air Group 13. So that kind of brings us up to the 4th Marine Regiment for now anyway, and we'll get into it a little bit later. For those of you who don't know how the Marine Corps is structured, and I'm just going to give you just a very basic, because the structure changes, the organization changes as we get into conflicts and different situations arise. But the Marine Corps is pretty much historically over the last 100 years, except for World War II, was made up of 3 Marine Infantry divisions and 3 Marine Air Wings. And the 1st Marine Division had 3 regiments, just like all divisions do. And so in a regiment, you typically have 3 battalions, and each battalion has about 200 to 250, usually 250 men, with about 4 platoons. So that gives you a little bit of an idea where we are. So what we're talking about as far as Echo and Ramadi is we're talking about Echo Company, 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines. And now I'm going to turn it over to Scott. And Scott, now that I've given a little bit of a background to this, tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I'm just, first I want to say thanks for your service, Bill, and it's great to be on your program. And my background is probably pretty similar to yours. By some high school friends of mine who introduced me to the Marine recruiters. And you know, these guys are larger than life. And I had led a pretty unsupervised, high-risk lifestyle as a young adult. And when I met the recruiters, I saw these great big group of risk takers, and I'm like, these guys are a perfect fit. So I enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1988 and went to boot camp in 1989 and served through Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and soon found the value of a college education and wanting to continue to learn, continue to lead, which led me to being accepted to Illinois State University. And I graduated college in 3 years, which was much better than I did in high school. And I say that, Bill, because it's a tribute to the discipline and the leadership that I was surrounded by at a very young age, and that discipline and mission-oriented mindset that the Marine Corps really gives to young men and women who serve their country. And after I got my degree, I decided that I still had a desire to serve. Mm-hmm. And I still wanted to lead. And that led me back into my commissioning program as a young lieutenant, well, not so young lieutenant. And I held various positions of leadership and responsibility. And over the course of 10 or 12 years, ultimately that thrust me into what I like to call is probably the pinnacle of my career as a company commander in the streets of Ramadi, Iraq in 2006, when I was really privileged to lead some of the best warfighters, both men and women, that I've known to this day. And I'm still very connected to everyone.
Yeah, for those of you, I've read Echo Ramadi, and it's a fantastic book, and it really, I felt like I was there. I mean, it's so vivid. But Scott, you got to Camp Pendleton, I believe, in 2006, and I don't know if I remember exactly where you were before that. Quantico, maybe, perhaps, but that's where you took over Echo Company. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines is stationed at Camp Pendleton along with 1st Battalion, 4th Marines. And I, like most Marines, I don't like to do math in public, and understanding the structure of the Marine Corps, even to a veteran of 24 years in the Marine Corps, is confusing at times. But when 4th Marines stayed over in Okinawa, their colors are still in Okinawa at Camp Hansen or at Camp Schwab, and the rest of the regiment was farmed out back to the state. 1-4 is at Camp Pendleton, 2-4 is at Camp Pendleton, and 3-4 is at 29 Palms. And I've served in both 2-4, 3-4, and regiment myself. Yeah, Camp Pendleton is probably one of the better duty stations that the Marine Corps decided to plant a flag at. Not unlike the jewel of 29 Palms in the high desert of California, but
which is where the 3rd Battalion is. Yeah, I was looking at that. Actually, you can find that on the internet. It's amazing how much people can learn about our armed forces. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not. I ended up with a top secret security clearance, and I came to respect, security and taking care of classified material. And also, as you did and I did, took the oath to defend and support the Constitution. So we take all those things pretty seriously. And now it seems like it's an open book for everything.
Well, I agree. And when you say we, I think you're talking about a very small segment of the American population. Less than 0.5% of the 330 million Americans raise their hand and swear an oath to defend this country. And I think that oftentimes gets misunderstood, how very rare that segment of our American population is, how young these men and women are who volunteer to serve when we established this all volunteer, military under President Richard Nixon. And I think that we have grown as a nation. We've grown as a military community. And you kind of touched on that during your introduction about the importance of serving in this generation, and how the Marine Corps itself has grown, and we've restructured and we've gotten better. And despite really operating in several conflicts on the best doctrine that 1980 had to offer, the Marine Corps and all the sister services do a phenomenal job at training these young men and women to be the best they can be, both in training and in combat. And we've seen that time and again over at least the past 14 years in this current conflict since we went into Iraq and Afghanistan. And what's important too is we're still in Iraq, we're still in Afghanistan, we're still in Syria. And that generation, our younger generation, Bill, they're really the ones carrying the mantle of success. And I always say that because I don't care what your job is in the Marine Corps, what your job is in the military. You're a very small percentage of the American population. You should be proud of your service. So I don't care if you're kicking doors in Iraq or pumping gas or scraping paint off a ship. Your service matters. And to every veteran watching this program, I say thank you for your service, because it's absolutely valuable and you're a unique part of the American population.
You're almost echoing, I use that word, in my book, 2020 Clear Vision for America. I used an example of the military to indicate or show how everyone is equally important. So in the military, for example, everyone from a E1 private to a 4-star general are equally important. We just play different roles and we have different assignments, but everybody is needed. If we didn't need them, we wouldn't have them. So it doesn't work unless everybody is important and everybody has a job to do and everybody does their job. And that kind of leads me to when you were first at Pendleton, you took over a company that had some experienced guys and then some guys who hadn't been in combat who were pretty new. And some of these guys were, 18, 19 years old? Was there one that was 17?
It may have been 17. But yeah, across the board, the average age was 19 years old. And, that's significant because they made up the predominance of my company at the time in 2006, and I was very fortunate to have about 50 seasoned veterans who fought in the first Battle of Ramadi in 2004. And when I say seasoned, I'm talking about 22-year-old sergeants and corporals now. So to put that in perspective for the general population, that's an immense amount of responsibility thrust on a very young man or woman that has to make these split-second life and death decisions on a daily basis. That's absolutely what they were doing in the city of Ramadi in 2006 as we fought day in and day out, sometimes 3, 4, 5 times a day in direct contact with a well-trained surgeon forces. That amount of responsibility and that pressure, that friction that they had to deal with at such a very early age, and everything that I was tasking them to do, these superhuman acts on a daily basis, they always perform phenomenally. And I've never been prouder of a group of guys that I fought with. And every day, day in and day out, they took care of each other better than anything I've ever known, Bill. And that's attributed to not only their training, but the leadership they had at every level, from the young lieutenants to those seasoned 22-year-old sergeants. And even at the young age of 19, some of these guys are just natural leaders, and they really took care of each other. It's remarkable to think about that. And, while we're talking about this, as we sit here from multiple generations, I'm always impressed at that, because in today's mainstream media, our millennial generation constantly gets thrown under the bus about being these soft snowflakes melting away in the sun. And I disagree 100%, because I don't care what generation you're from, whether you're the greatest generation, silent, baby boomer, a Gen Xer. These millennials are the ones that are carrying this mantle of success forward. Our millennials are fighting in Iraq today. They're the ones serving in Afghanistan today. And they're the ones that, if you and I don't have faith in them and share our experiences, share our wins, share our losses, all those slippery points and lessons learned in life, that's what real leadership is. And that's the responsibility that we have to these millennials. Because I think that we don't breed generations in America, Bill. We breed greatness. That's what the bumper stickers say. America is number one. It's because of these great people and these great families that are willing to serve and support our military that we enjoy the ability to sit in Cocoa Beach or in Southern California and enjoy what we do today.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because as you were talking about that, I remember when I first went in 1958, I was accepted into the officer candidate course right out of college, and it was a 12-week course. And it wasn't until we got through that course and graduated, and there were, in my platoon, we were the honor platoon, 33 out of 48 were actually commissioned. And at that time, we kept hearing, and this was 1958, we kept hearing about the old Corps and how great the old Corps was back in the 1940s and World War II and Korea. And now I guess you guys would look back at me and say I'm the old Corps, but really, as I read the book, I'm so impressed, and I've talked to recruiters in our area, and I've talked to a lot of Marines on active duty, and I have some on Facebook and Twitter. You guys are just carrying on tremendously, and probably doing more than what we did. And I think of myself going through basic officer school. It was about 8 months long, and now I think it's a little bit shorter, but you had 3 lieutenants that came into Echo Company out in Camp Pendleton right before you deployed to Iraq. And they were all fresh out of infantry school, which is something that we didn't have in the Marine Corps. That was all included in basic officer school. Now, I guess basic officer school, and then you can go in, if you're accepted, you go into infantry training school. So, and that's what, 8 weeks. So that's what you had, that you built your fighting unit on, was these young men and the young lieutenants.
They received phenomenal training at the infantry officers course in Quantico, which is right next door to the basic school. And I'll actually be out there next week for an event, but to describe that type of training and what it takes to get there. And again, speaking to who serves in our military and these young lieutenants, they spend nearly a year of their life, in Quantico, being prepared before they're ever given the opportunity to step in front of a platoon of Marines. And this is the Marine Corps and the military entrusts only the finest to lead these young men and women. And the shade of gray between the lieutenant and those they lead is a college education. Sometimes it's only years difference, and sometimes it's not even that. But the amount of time and investment that they get to really prepare and screen those officers within our military, I think, is phenomenal. And they continue to impress me. And they continue to adapt to the changing threats on the battlefield, the different dynamics that we're experiencing on the battlefield today, and this global landscape where we constantly have to be prepared to lead and fight in all of these changing conditions. And I think that that's a testament to our senior leadership service-wide about adapting to the dynamic situations on the world stage and they continue to do that. And they do that through these small programs and training modules, despite that doctrine that's so outdated that we haven't had time to catch up with. Our senior leadership is in tune with that, and we continue to train to meet these global challenges. And we see that day in and day out as we're preparing for not the current fight, but the ones 2-3 steps down the road. And I think that's a real testament to what they're doing.
Yeah. You know, a lot of people don't understand it, but our enlisted Marines go through basic training boot camp in either San Diego or Parris Island, where officers really go through a boot camp in Quantico. And I remember at a reunion, I was talking to some enlisted men, and one said, "Well, you officers had it easy. You never had to go through boot camp." And I thought, "What? We didn't have to go through boot camp. I spent a year in Quantico." So you know, I guess it wasn't that difficult, or maybe it was more difficult than what I thought. But you know, that whole year in Quantico, that was 24/7. That's all we did is we learned how to become Marines. And when we were commissioned, just like graduating from boot camp, you earn the title Marine. And I don't know about you when you went through, but our DI had a way of calling us candidate that made it sound like it was the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, well, I got a double dose because I went through enlisted boot camp at San Diego Marine Corps Recruit Depot, and then went back in as an officer. So I've seen both sides, and it's the most grueling training there is. And the difference for viewers and listeners is to understand is that when you enlist, it's a building process. They take you down to the basic element, and then they build you up into a Marine. And for officers, it's an evaluation process where they're evaluating your leadership potential to go into that next phase of training. And sometimes people ask me, did being enlisted make you a better officer? And my answer is always the same, Bill. No, it didn't make me a better officer. Being a Mustang officer, which is, a horse of many different breeds, and it's a title that's bestowed with some respect to be called a Mustang. But I think it just gave me a better perspective of what was important. And that was the time that the young Marines had and the importance of utilizing every hour in the day effectively, never misusing their time, and really understanding what they were going through at that young level. And I think that there's a lot of words that we list on our walls and charts about leadership traits and principles as Marines especially, but the real great leaders understand to read in between the lines and look for those words like love and compassion and understanding and caring, because those words aren't taught to us in the schools that professional warriors attend. And the real great leaders understand that when it's okay to be hard on your men, and when you need to reach down, put your arm around them and pick them back up. And I think that we don't own that exclusively, and certainly that's not exclusive to me, because there's plenty of great leaders that also understand that. And I'm fortunate because I had so many great leaders mentor and train me along my career.
Yeah. And that's really an important point that you're bringing up, because in business, and I've worked as a business consultant, there's a thought process of management by walking around. And in reading your book, I could tell that your leadership was being with your troops. You weren't sitting back someplace or hiding someplace. You were out there in the forefront, walking around with your troops through Ramadi and wherever else you were. And I think that's really important, because that's what really gives you that bond. And I think that's so important in leadership. There's something else when you talked about love and compassion, and I want to tell a little bit is in reading a book, one of Major Huesing, his captain at that time, one of his guys was Corporal Libby. And I think, you know, you had quite a lot of experience with him and got to know him pretty well. He was a great Marine, and he was your first casualty over there in Echo Company. And I don't know if you want to talk about him or not, but you did something that's just extraordinary that just really touched me. It almost had me in tears as I was reading it. As you said, hey, I need some time away, and you went outside and you found a place by the hood of a truck or something like that, and actually called on a satellite phone, called his mother and talked to her. And I know if it was me, I think I hope that I would have done the same thing, but I think I'd have been shaking in my boots trying to make that phone call.
Well, I always, it's always difficult to talk about, you know, losses of your Marines, because you can train as best as possible and think that you're always going to be able to protect them. But when you're in an environment like Ramadi, which was absolutely the deadliest city in Iraq, you know, you can't protect them all the time. And it was inevitable that we were going to lose Marines. And Corporal Libby was the first loss that the entire battalion suffered on December 6th, 2006, when we were engaged in a 5-hour firefight. And he died doing what Marines do best, and that's taking care of fellow Marines. And, you know, I was very fortunate to be able to find some time and call Dustin's mom, Jenny Libby, and his dad, Judd, and his brother, Chris, that night. It was shortly thereafter. I think it was probably the next day, because we fought into the morning hours till like 3 or 4 in the morning that night. And just being able to call them and understand what had happened to their son, I think was very important for them. And I know if it was me, a simple letter wouldn't have been enough. And to make those types of phone calls is never easy. But I don't think it's really a story of sadness. And although it's tough to talk about sometimes, I think that Jenny and Judd and Chris and all the other Gold Star families that lost so much, but they continue to love us so much, they want it to be a story of hope and of brightness, because despite their loss, Bill, these amazing people, these extraordinary families continue to love us so much. And even that night on the phone, despite everything they were going through, they told us to keep fighting, and that Dustin loved being a Marine more than anything. And to hear those words from her, and to hear that compassion and love in her voice, not talking to me as some tough Marine commander, but as she was to her son, I just can only describe these people as extraordinary, and that's what they truly are.
Yeah. And speaking of the Marines in Ramadi, and it was one of the toughest places, I guess, to be. Tell us a little bit about what your day was like there, because you guys sometimes didn't sleep, or if you just got a few hours at a time, and it wasn't like, you know, every day at 5 o'clock you went home and took a shower and went out and had a nice meal or something like that.
I think I'm not sure what. I'm sure my record was beat by many Marines about not showering, but it may have been close to I don't know, 8 weeks before I had a shower at one point. But those were luxuries in an environment like that, and there was no daily schedule, because the enemy gets a vote. And at that time in 2006, during the surge strategy, the country of Iraq had essentially become this giant game of whack-a-mole, where we were hammering down the insurgents in one city. They would go to ground, bleed out, and then pop up in another. And then when President George W. Bush and General David Petraeus ordered the surge, essentially we were covering down on every city. And when my company, as part of the 15th MU, the Marine Expeditionary Unit, was thrust into Ramadi with Fox Company, we were there to leverage the 1st Brigade combat team's power to really gain a foothold, because the insurgents wanted to fight us in Ramadi. And again, this is a city of over 300,000 people, Bill. The cityscape itself looked like a post-apocalyptic nightmare where every building was rubbled, pockmarked with bullet holes and covered in this film of gray dust in the gray city, Ramadi, which translates in Arabic. And these conditions that the guys fought under, with the enemy getting a vote, where the front line was literally everywhere, where we fought street to street, house to house, room to room, day in and day out. This dynamic environment you could not set your watch by. And we quickly found out when we occupied the city that these were the conditions we had to fight in. And we had to adapt and change our fighting techniques and styles so we could fight and win and survive in that type of environment. So one thing we did on the night through our advanced thermals, our imaging devices, our optics, and just the fact that we trained a lot at night as Marines, we've quickly understood that patrolling during the daytime was a extremely risky and deadly endeavor, because it wasn't a matter of if we would get in contact with the enemy, it was just when and how often. So we quickly adapted, and we were aggressive and very offensive at our nighttime patrolling, with a combat hunter mentality to attack and continue to kill or capture anti-Iraqi forces and constantly knock the enemy back on its heels. That's what the Marines did. And we did that with the support of our U.S. Army brothers, which were instrumental in our success in winning in the city of Ramadi. And you'll hear me say winning in the city of Ramadi, because I never want that to not be the narrative of this historic battle. It wasn't just the first or second battle of Ramadi. It really was a 2-year fight that began in 2004 and that hopefully was ended in 2007. And that wasn't just through my company. That was through our battalion and multiple Army units and other Marine battalions that occupied that deadly city.
And you mentioned support from the Army. I know you called in some rocket strikes, Glimars, I believe it is, rockets, and somebody even questioned, how expensive are they? And I guess it doesn't make any difference how expensive they are if it's going to help you save your Marines and get what you need to do.
That's a great story that, again, when I had 5 interviews with my Marines and the families and the soldiers that fought, and those were the stories that I didn't see. And that story was communicated to me from my second in command, then First Lieutenant Bobby Lee, when we were calling in guided multiple launch rockets from Fallujah to suppress enemy positions that had become hardened. And we were very fortunate to be under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Chuck Ferry with Task Force 19 Infantry. And this guy was a warfighter who knew his business. He was a Special Forces soldier that was now in command of the task force, and he leveraged us and all of the assets at our disposal. When we called those rockets in that night, it is a great story. When my XO was standing there in the command operations center, and another young Army captain turned around and says, "Hey, sir, those rockets cost like $250,000 a piece." And Chuck just glared back at him with that love he had for his Marines and said, "I don't care if they cost $25 million. They killed a U.S. Marine tonight. Approve the mission." And, I get chills just talking about that story, but I think it's really emblematic of the type of brotherhood that we shared under the worst conditions, experiencing the worst war has to offer and the worst humanity has to offer as we fought in that city.
Well, obviously, through your leadership, your guys really took care of each other, and they felt such a strong bond for each other. And that's really, I think, what separates the United States Marine Corps Marines from other branches of service and other countries' services is, we're still the same guys. We're still American guys, but that's that brotherhood we have, and we're there, and we think so much about protecting our own and working, you know, and being with our own, that it just is a phenomenal situation, I guess. Trying to think of the right word to put, dynamic, I guess would be the word. And that's something that the Marines have, and God bless all the Marines, because everyone that I've ever talked to, they always say, "Hey, I got your six."
It really was a great relationship, and the old rivalry that exists sometimes outside of completely absent, because we viewed ourselves as one team, one fight with one mission in hand. And our mission was simple. It was to kill or capture anti-Iraqi forces. And that's what we did day in and day out, because we weren't fighting politics. We weren't fighting policy or strategy. We were fighting the enemy. And through that combined effort with the Army and the Marine team, we were very fortunate and very successful, because in comparison to the Army, the Marine at the company level, with over 200 plus Marines and soldiers and sailors, really gave them the leverage that they needed to get out. And as I describe in the book, one of the commanders described this as a blunt instrument of war, that we did operate a little unconventionally in the fact that we were very willing, or I was very willing, able to take on anybody that could carry a rifle, for lack of a better term. If you were a combat cameraman or civil affairs, dog handlers, interpreters, special forces, and all of these people that I brought into the team when our numbers grew well over 250 at times at the company level, in comparison to the Army, who only had about 80 to 100 soldiers, because they'd been in the city so long before we arrived, and they stayed long after we left. And that, I think, when I look back, although we made a definite impact and really changed the tide, it was through that combined effort. And I think, what we did in the city is merely a scratch compared to what the Army and the other units that had to really, stay in that city for up to, 14, 18 months at a time. Those guys really had a lot of challenges thrust in front of them. And I think that it's just a remarkable experience that I'm proud to share, not only our accomplishments, but also those of our, U.S. Marine and U.S. Army brothers.
Yeah. When you talked about everybody with a rifle, for those who don't know, every Marine is a rifleman, and every year, whether you're a general or a lieutenant or a captain or a corporal, you qualify on the rifle range, right? But there were some guys that you didn't give weapons to, and I think it would be good to talk just a few minutes about your terps.
Yeah, our interpreters, they weren't allowed to carry weapons in most cases. And what's important for people to understand is, and I dedicate an entire chapter of the book to talk about these brave citizen warriors. And as I described earlier, the city of Ramadi was, 300,000 people, sprawling urban cityscape, and we fought amongst the people. I mean, when I say that, we literally at times lived amongst the local Iraqi people, and sometimes in mainstream media throughout this war, they were referred to as collateral damage. And they're not collateral damage. They're people. These are husbands and wives and kids that want to go to college and drive a car for the first time and play soccer. So they weren't collateral damage. They were people. And at times they were very kind and peace-loving people that wanted stability, but had become so desensitized to the violence and the chaos surrounding them that it almost became a spectator sport to them. But within their own population, there was this small segment of Iraqis who also volunteered to serve and join our coalition of multinational forces to help us speak the language. And that was our interpreters. And these were, again, young 18, 19-year-old kids that really, as I write, were, in my opinion, akin to our, patriots of the American Revolution, who said, enough, I've had enough of the dictatorship. I've had enough of the murder. intimidation and the ruthless, hateful ideology that the insurgents were trying to get across day in and day out. So they stepped up and they decided to go to work for contract companies to become interpreters. And without our interpreters, without these brave Iraqi citizens coming to our units at every level, we would not have been as effective as we were to be able to communicate, to gather information off the battle space, and to help those that couldn't help themselves. And along with the Marines, that's what the interpreters did. And I was very fortunate to have some of the best interpreters within my company, and my Marines embraced them and they loved them like their own and took care of them and their safety, because they did operate on the battlefield without weapons because their companies wouldn't allow that because they weren't trained as military combatants. Mm-hmm. And to all of those interpreters, I just, attribute a great deal of our success, and I'm very proud to call many of them friends to this day. And I'm very proud to call two of my interpreters fellow Americans to this day, because they are Americans with U.S. citizenship that we brought over here, and just great Americans.
Yeah. I could tell in reading the book that they fit right in, and you had a special bond with them. And at the end of Scott's book, he lists many of the people who served, and he mentioned the interpreters. And some of them, I think one is in Chicago and working in IT, and they got degrees. And so these were just young guys who wanted, like you said, they wanted to get ahead and they wanted to have, a good life. And this really, I think, helped them gain that. So it's not like many people think, oh, the Iraqis, what horrible people they are. They're just a lot of people, young guys with aspirations, just like the rest of us.
They really are a great example of how what they sacrificed and what they did is very emblematic of that culture. And the small 5% of radical extremists are not representative of that culture in the Middle East. I think that most people don't understand that. And one of the advantages we had was an understanding of the culture. And I think that, again, back to our training, is that our young warfighters that go and fight, when I talk to my Vietnam vets and my Korean War vets, is that our current service members have a vastly different and in-depth understanding of the culture that they're fighting in. And that really helps them to survive and win on the battlefield. And it's remarkable. And our success stories of our interpreters that I talk about in the book, I think, again, is also emblematic of the fact that the story is really about the people. It's absolutely about the fighting and that excitement of war and the chaos that surrounds it, but it's really about people. These amazing people, our Gold Star families, the Marines, our interpreters, all of those people that supported us while we fought and continue to support us to this day. That's why it was important for me to share this story, not just as a battlefield chronology, because that's not what it is. It's not another war story. It's about people and this power of human connection that sustained us while we fought, and that really sustains us to this day. It's just a remarkable thing to not only have led those men and women and the families 12 years ago, but being able to still lead to this day, because leadership doesn't stop when you leave the battlefield. It's not a 9-to-5 job. And I think that I'm very fortunate that I still feel that connection and that leadership and privilege to lead those men that I fought with when they call me and ask me for advice or ask me for a letter of recommendation, or they're applying to graduate school. I mean, because they grow up so fast, Bill. And I'm just extremely proud to really share this story and make sure that these great battles and these great Marines don't fall onto the wayside of mainstream media. And that's why programs like yours are so instrumental in helping share this message. I want to say thanks again.
Yeah, Scott, what you're going to find is something that I found over the last about 12 or 13 years. The squadron that I was in for 3 years out in Hawaii decided to have reunions, and so they invited the officers, and there's usually 3 or 4 of us that'll attend these reunions. And I'm just amazed by what happened to all these young 18 and 19-year-old guys, and I remember them, and they were just high school guys, and yet they went on become school principals and business leaders, had their own companies, all kinds of things like that. I mean, it's just amazing what you're going to find as you get a little bit older and your guys get a little bit older. They're also going to be like that. They're going to be the leaders, and they're going to start businesses, and they're going to be teachers. They're going to be consultants. Who knows what they're going to be, but they'll be very successful. There's no doubt about that. So in your book, I really appreciated, you talking about the guys at the end of the book, so you really get to know them. And I was thinking, boy, I'd like to know some of these guys. These are really great people, great Marines. And now, do you have any thoughts about, and I want to make sure everybody understands, this is really a great book, and it's exactly what Scott has talked about. It's a book about people who were thrust into a very hostile environment. Do you have another book, or what are your future plans?
Well, right now, I am actually working on my second book, another great story of military heroics. But I continue to stay engaged, writing, op-ed articles for various publications and online magazines. And right now, I'm still working the book tour. I'm still engaged since we launched February 20th. I do a lot of public speaking to talk about this story and to really share that theme of human connection, that power of human connection, when I go and talk to universities or corporate leadership conferences about the theme of leadership and team building and overcoming adversity. And again, that power of human connection that is so vital, not just on the battlefield, but in the boardroom, because there's no such thing as combat leadership, just leadership. And I don't care if you're reading Clausewitz or Covey, those tenets of leadership that come through in the book, I think are timeless. And that's not just cliche, because every generation deals with this. But what we experienced, and to be able to share my perspectives on what was effective, and I think also to really share my humanity and my humility and failures, was something not easy to do. But I also think that through time and age, and as you know, a little wisdom comes with that, is to allow yourself to be seen as more human to those you lead is something, again, that they don't teach us. And I probably didn't do that all the time as a young captain or as a young lieutenant, because you have to have this, sense of bravado at times that comes through. But through age and experience, I think being able to share that part of myself, not only in the book, but every time I speak and give examples of things I've done wrong, or let people understand that, fighting in a situation like this or throughout my career is not like in the movies. And it shouldn't ever be portrayed like that, because to do it doesn't do justice to those that really fought and dealt with that type of uncertainty and that pressure and that indescribable friction that we had to go through day in and day out. And, that's what really makes me happy, is sharing the story, continuing to help veterans. And as you know, I'm also the executive director of Save the Brave, which is a nonprofit that one of my young Marines started, Nick Velez, who fought with me in Ramadi. And we help connect veterans who are struggling with post-traumatic stress, who need to connect, that small segment of our population that have really seen the worst things, that connecting them is what we found is the best medicine to help them deal with some of those pieces of trauma that they've experienced. And a portion of the proceeds of Echo and Ramadi go to Save the Brave, which is what I'm committed to. I think, you give first, Bill, and good things follow. And to be able to do that is really what makes me happy at the beginning and the end of every day, is to continue to help veterans, to promote their sacrifices and the real meaning of sacrifice to those that don't understand it.
Mm-hmm. It's just an amazing story, and what you're saying is just so indicative of what I've found. I've actually have some interviews that are in about this time period that I'm doing this with you, Scott. One is Cadence Call Ministries, about a Marine, John Murphy, in Birmingham, Alabama, who's helping Marines with PTSD and working to cut down this tragic 20-plus suicides per day by veterans. I mean, and I know that's what you're involved in. And I've got another interview with a Marine combat vet from Vietnam, who's also has a book and a video about helping Marines. And I find so many Marines, and just like here in Brevard County, we have Marine Corps League and American Legion and Brevard Veterans Memorial Center, and we're all about helping veterans and other Marines, and we're all volunteers. And that's the amazing thing about it, is we don't expect anybody to give us anything. We don't feel like we're entitled. We feel like it's a privilege to be able to do something for our brothers.
Yeah, absolutely. And same thing with SaveTheBrave.org. We don't take a single dime. None of us are in it for the money. All proceeds go to help veterans. And again, that's what I'm committed to, and the rest of our board and volunteers and supporters, because just like you, it's through this network. Not just Marines, although we're a pretty tight-knit organization and willing to help each other. There's so many other great organizations that are willing to really put some skin in the game and volunteer their time and services, and sometimes money, if that's all they're comfortable doing, to really help veterans. And I think we live in a generation now, in this time, that we're very fortunate to have so many smaller 501s and nonprofit orgs that are mutually supporting, that really want to help and support in so many different ways. And to be a part of that is another thing that really makes me extremely proud of what I do and what my team does, and to continue this message. So that number that you mentioned, that 20 a day, it's not some push-up challenge on Facebook or some bumper sticker. These are real people, Bill. Mm-hmm. These are our brothers and sisters and our sons and daughters. And these are my Marines that we've lost tragically. And, many of those names are known to me. We've lost many in my company alone since we've come home from Iraq. But the numbers are just staggering. And some reports, 40 to 50,000 have taken their lives to the effects of post-traumatic stress related to this long war. And the number 20 a day is only that reported by the Department of Defense. And, these are people, Bill, that fought equally alongside of us in combat. And there's no memorial for them. There's no granite wall with their name etched in it, and their families need to be supported by this network that you and I share. And I think that's an important message. And again, it's a vital message that we can't forget.
Okay. I guess that's a good place for us to stop. Scott, I just want to thank you so much for being on with me. You're just a fantastic guest. And I want to thank you for your service. And you are really a fine Marine, a true Marine. And I'm humbled to be able to talk with you today.
Well, the privilege is mine, Bill, and the same goes to you. And if the viewers want to see some actual pictures of the Marines, they can go to my website at echoandramadi.com, and they can buy the book on Amazon at amazon.com, and it's on Audible and hardcover right now. And again, you're not only getting a great story, but you're also helping veterans with post-traumatic stress. And I'm always honored when people send me copies. They go to the website and they send me copies. I come home from a trip and there's stacks of books from veterans, and I sign every one of them with a personal note and mail them back to them. If there's people watching the show, I will be in the DC area next week. And then on May 4th, I will be in Denver at Tattered Cover for a large book signing. They're hosting me along with some other radio personalities who are going to sponsor the event. So I always look forward to getting out, meeting fellow veterans, and signing your copies. And again, thanks for having me on the program, Bill, and Semper Fi.
Semper Fi, Scott. Okay, boys and girls, I'm back, and I hope you enjoyed the interview with Scott. And I want you to buy this book. This is really a fantastic book. It's just wonderful to read. You won't regret it. You know, it's really something that you'll really enjoy. And if you remember, when I close, I always say, where there is no vision, the people perish. That's Proverbs 29:18. And where the American people have no vision, the American people will perish. And I also would like for you all to remember that I also have a book I'd like for you to get. And that would be a fantastic thing if you bought Scott's book and bought my book too. Anyway, if it comes down to you can only afford one, buy Scott's book, because it's a great read. There's no question about it. So God bless you all. God bless our Corps. God bless Scott. God bless all the guys in Echo Company, 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines. And God save our America, because we need you now more than ever before.